Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere hot, really hot. You're standing under a starry Persian sky, and even though the sun set hours ago, the ground still radiates heat like a sleepy oven. The scent of dust, stone, and faint herbs hangs in the air, and you're wrapped in a robe that clings a little too snugly to your back. The desert doesn't cool easily, and the sand beneath your sandals feels like a loaf of bread fresh from the fire. But here's the twist, you're on your way to find ice. Real, crisp, cold ice. In the desert. Not only does it exist out here, it's a delicacy. Your task? To understand how one of the most advanced ancient empires kept ice cream frozen in a climate that could roast dates on the sidewalk. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this heat in a hoodie. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, post your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the edge of a Persian settlement sometime around 500 BCE. Behind you lies a flickering village of oil lamps and palm-shaded courtyards. In front of you? A quiet, dark plain. You're here with a few other late-night stragglers, each of you part of a small team given a strange mission by the local satrap steward: escort a mule cart out into the coldest part of the night, just before dawn, and harvest ice. The steward didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. This job is both mundane and prestigious. You've been asked to participate in the Empire's most peculiar miracle, creating winter in the desert. You press forward, passing silent orchards and stone cisterns. The air hums faintly, almost musically, with crickets and distant owls. Then you see it, a low, square depression in the ground, maybe 30 feet wide and bordered with clay tiles. It's a shallow pit, exposed to the open air. Seems useless until you step closer. The air here feels sharper. Cooler. Moisture tickles your nose. You lean down and run your fingers along the ground. Frost. In the middle of the desert. And beneath the surface? Sheets of delicate, newborn ice. This is an ice pond. Every winter, the ancient Persians would dig shallow pools to trap and chill water overnight, relying on frigid desert nights to freeze it. Even though the days scorch the earth, the dry air and sudden temperature drops after dark made ice-making surprisingly achievable. It's a little like setting your drink outside in January, if your backyard was made of sand and your January hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit by noon. You kneel beside the frozen layer. It's thin, just a crust, maybe half an inch, but enough. Men begin to chip away with broad bronze scrapers. They lift the sheets carefully, like glass, and slide them into straw-lined boxes packed onto carts. The ice will be taken to a yachtchal, a massive mud brick structure where it'll be stored, protected, and even turned into primitive sorbets for nobility. Of course, this system isn't perfect. Sometimes the nights aren't cold enough. Sometimes wind kicks up sand that settles over the pond like a gritty blanket. And sometimes, just sometimes, the locals whisper that mischievous spirits interfere, laughing at your efforts to master cold in the desert. But mostly, it works. It's a ritual now. One you've joined. Back at the edge of the village, you pass a group of children peeking from behind a palm fence. One waves and whispers, "Snow farmers," with the wide-eyed reverence usually reserved for warriors or priests. You stop, take a breath, and realize just how clever and absurd this whole thing is. But it works. Historians still argue whether the earliest yachtchals date back to the Achaemenid Empire, but evidence suggests they were in use at least 2,000 years ago. Their presence in Persia isn't just a testament to innovation, it's proof that luxury, even in a harsh climate, was possible with just enough planning, labor, and perhaps a touch of magic. You fall into step with the others, your arms full of glistening frost sheets wrapped in cloth. Someone hums a tune. Someone else laughs and calls out a joke about frozen toes. It's a strangely peaceful scene, low-effort chatter, soft crunching of footsteps on sand, and the absurd beauty of pulling winter out of thin air. When you finally reach the Yakchal, still distant for now, it rises like a pale dome in the moonlight. You'll get there soon. For now, though, enjoy the walk. The stars are ridiculously bright tonight, and the ice is real. You'd never think you'd be grateful for frostbite in the desert, but hey, Persia has a way of surprising you. You approach it slowly at first. It almost doesn't look real, a soft, conical hump silhouetted against the dusty pink horizon. The air's cooler now, but not by much. The Yakchal stands like a relic of another world, rising 30 feet high with the kind of quiet confidence that says, I've been here longer than you've been alive. And that's probably true. This ancient Persian ice house is no crumbling hut. It's an architectural flex, crafted from a mixture of clay, sand, egg whites, goat hair, and lime. The resulting blend, known as sarouj, resists heat like a pro and shrugs off earthquakes with the indifference of a bored camel. You stand at the base, tilting your head upward to take in the sweep of the dome. It's not perfectly smooth, no lasers or blueprints back then, but it has an elegant, purposeful shape. Broad at the bottom, narrowing toward a louvered crown that lets hot air escape. Think, reverse oven meets spaceship. You run your fingers along the surface. It's rough and cool. Not cold exactly, but cooler than the surrounding air. The material breathes, expanding and contracting gently with the changing temperatures. It's passive climate control, centuries before anyone invented thermostats. A low door appears around the back, nearly hidden by shadows. You duck inside and enter a space that's instantly darker, quieter, and, yes, cooler. Much cooler. The wall slopes steeply above you, disappearing into darkness. Your voice would echo in here if you spoke, but you don't. Something about the place hushes you automatically, like a cathedral made of mud and intent. Below your feet is a pit, nearly 10 feet deep. And at the bottom? Ice. Real, solid, glorious ice, stacked in layers like flaky pastry. You can see where older deliveries have partially melted and refrozen, forming a cloudy mosaic of time. Each block was hauled here by hand or mule. Each one has a story. They were stacked here at night, usually just before dawn, and insulated with straw and ash. The shape of the dome draws warm air upward and out through vents at the top, while the thick walls and pit keep the inside cold. It's so well designed that ice harvested in winter could last into late summer, long after the dates have ripened and the air smells like baked rock. You sit on the edge for a moment, your legs dangling above the frosty bounty. Somewhere above, a soft breeze slips in through a small opening, rustling the straw. It's like the Yakchal is breathing, slowly, steadily, anciently. Mainstream history books often gloss over these structures, but they're marvels. Pre-industrial air conditioning. Rural refrigerators. Architectural paradoxes. The name Yakchal literally means ice pit, but that doesn't quite capture the poetry of it. It's more like a stone poem to patience and cleverness. You imagine the workers who built it, layer by layer, in the biting winter months. They'd work from sunrise to sunset, baking bricks in the same sun that would one day try, and fail, to melt their work. They'd climb ladders with baskets of sarouj on their backs, slathering it into place with wooden trowels. Sometimes children helped, stirring lime with goat hair in wide clay vats. Not the most glamorous job, but essential. After all, you're not making an ordinary building, you're creating a container for cold. Quirky tidbit, in some regions, before ice was loaded into the Yakchal, workers would scatter dried rose petals or lavender across the pit. Why? Maybe for scent, maybe to deter pests, maybe just because it felt ceremonious. Either way, there's something charming about the idea of rose-scented ice, isn't there? Historians still argue whether these structures were used exclusively for ice or also doubled as food storage, particularly for perishable fruits or ceremonial drinks. Some think they served as chilly sanctuaries for prized goods, others believe the spiritual significance of preserving winter in summer gave them a nearly mythic status. You glance around the interior again. It's completely silent, except for the occasional creak as the dome breathes. You can imagine someone slipping in here on a sweltering afternoon, just to rest, to think, to sip something chilled. you stretch your legs and start to help unload the cart. The blocks are delicate, shatter-prone, and they must be slid down a slanted ramp to avoid breaking. It's like transporting babies made of glass and frost. Carefully, carefully, you guide one block into the pit. The sound it makes, soft, crisp, like breaking a wafer, is oddly satisfying. You pause to wipe your forehead. Even in the early morning, the heat is creeping back. But inside this dome, you could almost forget. Almost. One of the older workers calls out to you. He has a voice like a cracked kettle and a face shaped by 100 dawns just like this. He says something in Old Persian, which you don't understand. Then he laughs and tosses you a small wrapped bundle. Inside? A kind of early popsicle, slivers of ice packed with pomegranate syrup and a few threads of saffron. He motions for you to eat it now, before it melts. You take a bite. It's sour, sweet, icy. Completely unexpected. You're grinning before you know it. Maybe this job isn't so bad. The last of the ice gets packed away as the sky starts to pale. You step outside and squint toward the horizon. The sun isn't up yet, but you can feel it coming. Heat is already rising from the earth like a threat. You glance back at the yachtchel, now sealed for the day. It'll hold. It always does. And tonight, the cycle will begin again. Another walk, another harvest, another silent nod to an empire that somehow made snow in the sand. You tug your robe tighter and start the long walk back to the village. Behind you, the ice sleeps, wrapped in mud-brick dreams and cool shadows. Ahead, breakfast awaits. Possibly with more popsicles. The next night, just as the sky begins slipping from peach to navy, you're out again, this time headed not to the ice pond, but toward the gently sloping outskirts of the village where another quiet miracle is underway. Tonight, you're going to help make the ice, not just collect it. And that means stepping into the coldest part of the desert night with nothing but shallow water, the hope of frost, and an alarming lack of thermal underwear. You arrive at a row of long, low troughs carved into the earth, each only a few inches deep but wide enough to reflect the stars. These are the freezing pits. They're aligned deliberately, angled slightly so cold air flows across them like invisible silk. By now, the process feels half magic, half absurd. Pour water into a shallow hole, wait for the chill of night, and pray the universe cooperates. A few villagers are already here, bent over like gardeners tending to invisible crops. Someone nods at you and hands you a bucket, clay, warm from the walk, sloshing with clear water drawn from a canat earlier that evening. You kneel down, pour the water carefully into a pit, and watch as the liquid settles with a calm ripple. Then you sit back and wait. This is ice farming. No machines, no chemicals, just careful timing and patience. In some parts of Persia, particularly closer to the Zagros Mountains, nighttime temperatures could plummet rapidly, even below freezing, if the conditions were just right. Clear skies, low humidity, and calm winds were your best allies. Mainstream historians love to talk about the Persians' grand strategies and sprawling empires, but somehow they skip over this quieter genius, the fact that desert dwellers became ice farmers by simply watching nature and saying, "All right, let's work with that." Someone passes you a small clay cup filled with something fragrant. It's warm, herbal, with notes of mint and something lemony. You sip and sigh. It's going to be a long night, and this tea tastes like the kind of comfort that keeps your hand steady and your eyelids halfway open. Nearby, an older woman, wrinkles deep as dry riverbeds, leans on a stick and watches the pits. She hums quietly, and you catch just enough of the tune to recognize it from the lullabies sung to children in the village. Apparently, even the ice likes a song now and then. The stars are fully out now, thick and low. You can see your breath mist slightly as the temperature dips. The water in your pit trembles just once. Then, subtly, slowly, the edges begin to stiffen. You lean in closer. A thin crust forms across the top, like nature pressing pause. It's mesmerizing. A film of ice that, under your breath, seems too fragile to be real. And yet, it holds. Spreads. Thickens. This is what you've been waiting for. The villagers begin moving from pit to pit, checking on the progress. Some have already begun gently scraping off the surface ice with wide wooden blades, stacking it into large baskets lined with palm leaves. Every scrape has a sound, soft, satisfying, like parchment being torn. One young man miscalculates and breaks through the surface too early, sending a splash of half-frozen water across his tunic. He lets out a whisper-shouted curse, and everyone chuckles quietly. Mistakes aren't uncommon. Ice is fickle. You give your own pit another 10 minutes before scooping. As you work, someone leans over and tells you, conspiratorially, that in some villages, they used to toss tiny slivers of metal into the water to encourage the ice. Whether it helped or not is unclear, but it gave people something to blame when the night stayed stubbornly warm. The copper spirits were angry, they'd say, dead serious. Historians still argue whether this early ice harvesting method was truly Persian in origin or borrowed and refined from neighboring civilizations, Babylonians, perhaps, or even earlier Mesopotamian groups who dabbled in temperature tricks. The truth? Probably a little of everything. Cultural osmosis was as common as dust in your sandals back then. By now, your basket is half full of delicate, clouded ice sheets. They're stacked gently with straw between the layers, and someone adds a few rose petals, not for function, but tradition. It's believed the scent keeps the spirit of coldness content. Or maybe it's just nice. You glance up at the moon. It's dipping low now, casting silver light across the troughs. A slight wind picks up, brushing past your face with a chill that's not altogether unpleasant. Someone sighs contentedly. Another hums again. The desert has quieted down to a near silence broken only by the scrape of ice and the occasional creak of a straw basket being filled. You start to notice patterns. Some troughs freeze faster than others, depending on how the earth slopes, how much wind flows across, whether a wall or tree casts shade at the wrong time. The ice harvesters know all this by feel. No measurements, no thermometers. Just instinct and repetition. They say a good ice farmer knows the desert like a lover. Reads its moods. Learns its habits. Knows when it's faking a cold front and when it's truly ready to freeze. You wonder how long it would take you to learn that kind of intimacy with the land. The rest of the night passes in a quiet rhythm, pour, wait, scoop, stack. You feel a kind of sleepy meditation settle into your limbs. You're not really cold anymore, just comfortably numb, like your body gave up trying to keep score and let itself enjoy the rhythm of it all. As dawn begins to crawl up the horizon, painting the sand in gentle golds and lilacs, the work winds down. The pits will warm again soon, and what ice hasn't been collected will be left to melt. There's a strange satisfaction in that, too, the idea that nothing here lasts unless you earn it. One of the elders turns to you and says something in a voice thick with sleep and warmth. You don't catch all the words, but the meaning is clear enough. You did all right, snow farmer. Not bad for a first-timer. You smile and nod, then help lift the baskets onto carts. The animals grumble softly, shifting their weight. You whisper to your mule, and maybe it's your imagination, but he seems pleased to be carrying ice again. As you begin the slow walk back toward the actual, your breath still visible in the warming air, you wonder if you'll ever look at a freezer the same way again. Probably not. You arrive back at the Yakchul just as the first sliver of sun breaches the horizon, and it greets you like a house might greet its most loyal tenant, without ceremony, but with a silent sense of welcome. The air inside is still cool, undisturbed by the encroaching heat. As you duck through the low entry again, the yawn of the dome swallows the sunlight behind you, and everything softens into pale shadows and straw-scented calm. Today, instead of simply unloading the ice, you're helping build one from scratch. Not a massive, imperial-sized dome like this one, no. Today's Yakchul is going to be a small, rural version, tucked into a shady corner of the village garden. This one is meant to store just enough ice for a single household, to chill a clay pitcher, to sweeten a sherbet, or maybe just to delight a child with a frozen rosewater pebble on a hot afternoon. The plot of land chosen is narrow and a bit uneven. You follow an older builder named Nikan as he marks out a rough circle in the sand with a long stick. He doesn't measure anything in the way you'd expect, no rulers, no chalk lines. Just memory, pace, and experience. The circle will eventually become the foundation. It doesn't need to be perfect, just true enough. You begin by gathering materials: clay dug from a nearby hill, sand that's been sifted to remove stones, straw bundles, lime paste in wooden troughs. Someone brings out jugs of water and a bundle of what looks like very frizzy rope. It's goat hair. You blink. Goat hair? Yes. It's one of the key ingredients in sarouge, that magical mud that made the big yakchal so impressively heat-resistant. The hair adds elasticity, prevents cracking, and gives the mixture a kind of fibrous strength. It's like adding rebar to concrete if rebar bleated and ate your fig leaves when you weren't looking. Mainstream historical texts might skim past this part, but making sarouge is a full sensory experience. The lime burns slightly if it touches your skin for too long, and the mixture smells like earth and sour bread. You mix it with your feet, marching in slow circles in a pit while someone adds water and stirs with a wooden paddle. It squelches between your toes in a way that's both therapeutic and vaguely disgusting. You laugh. So does everyone else. As the base layer is poured and shaped into a shallow ring, you begin stacking bricks, each one handmade, sun-dried, and irregular. They fit together like puzzle pieces from a game that was invented halfway through playing. A slurry of sarouge goes between each brick, and by the time the first meter of wall is built, your arms are coated with mud and grit, and your mouth tastes faintly of lime from a dust breeze you weren't fast enough to dodge. The dome isn't built with scaffolding or support beams. Instead, it rises gradually in a spiral, brick by brick, angled inward just slightly. The secret? A circular guide frame, a kind of massive wooden compass that helps keep the shape even. As the dome curves inward, it supports its own weight, like a snail shell made from architecture. You're handed a brush made from palm fibers and told to smooth the outer surface. You do, and it's oddly satisfying, watching the uneven brickwork become a single continuous curve, stroked into uniformity like a sleeping cat. Quirky historical aside, some builders believed that whispering prayers or poetry into the wet sarouge would give the dome cold dreams and make it more effective. You're not sure whether that's physics or just charming superstition, but you murmur a few words anyway. Just in case. As the dome nears completion, a small circular vent is left open at the very top. This will act like a chimney, allowing hot air to escape while drawing cooler air from below. Combined with the thick walls and the underground pit, yes, this smaller yakchal has a pit, too, the whole structure becomes an ancient passive cooling system. Historians still debate how efficient these mini-ice houses were. Some claim they were mostly symbolic, status markers for wealthy families. Others argue they were essential in areas without access to the main city storage domes. What's clear is this: for a society that revered both hospitality and summer delicacies, having your own little pocket of winter was about more than just temperature. By late morning, the structure is finished. Still wet, still warm from the sun, but already casting a long cool shadow across the garden wall. You stand beside it with the others, sipping thick date syrup from a ceramic cup, watching steam rise off the sarouge as it bakes and sets. It smells like effort. You step inside. It's small, barely enough room for 2 people. But the design is the same: walls curving upward, a narrow vent above, and a recessed pit below where ice will be carefully placed. You crouch in the shade, feeling the inside already cooler than the air outside. It works. Even before insulation or ice. You smile. Later that evening, when the dome has dried just enough, children will come and peer inside. Someone will tell them stories, that the yakchal breathes, that it remembers coldness, that it keeps summer at bay with the help of whispered poems. Someone will hand them frozen grapes wrapped in fig leaves, and they'll giggle at how their teeth hurt and how the cold fogs their breath in the dusk. You won't forget this day. You may forget the soreness in your arms and the color of the bricks, but not the feeling of building something timeless with nothing but mud, hair, sun, and sweat. The yakchal will outlast your shoes, probably your house, maybe even your name. But for now, it holds your fingerprints. And maybe, if you pressed your ear against the wall and listened very carefully, you'd hear it dreaming of snow. You're back in the heart of the city now, well, citier in the ancient Persian sense. It's more a collection of dense mud brick courtyards, spice-strewn alleys, domed rooftops, and the kind of fragrant chaos that makes every turn feel like a new discovery. But tonight, you're not here for dates, or figs, or the ever-present cries of goat sellers arguing over copper coin rates. You're climbing. Specifically, you're climbing a wind catcher. Or rather, badger, as the Persians called it. An ancient invention that whispers cool air through even the hottest chambers, these towers stand tall and proud on the roofs of elite homes and caravanserais, catching the faintest breeze and channeling it down into the rooms below. You step through a shaded courtyard and begin the ascent via a narrow staircase that spirals around the inside of the structure. The walls are cool to the touch, lined with tiny access slits and vent panels that adjust airflow like some sort of pre-electric vac system. Every step up is a little darker, a little more echoey, until at last you emerge at the top, blinking into starlight and dry wind. From here, the badger looks like a giant chimney with attitude. For vertical shafts face each cardinal direction, like open mouths waiting for the right whisper of air. Inside, wooden flaps, hinged by leather strips and occasionally weighted with rocks, can be angled to control which shaft the wind flows through. And guess what? It works. You reach out a hand. A breeze skims your fingers, then slips down into the shaft like a snake. Below, you hear a faint stirring as the air is drawn through the house. You've just turned a desert building into a chilled sanctuary. The concept's deceptively simple: hot air rises, cool air sinks, and the wind is free, if you can catch it. Combine this with thick walls and carefully placed water basins, and you've got a room that feels like a different season altogether. No wires, no fuel. Just geometry and grace. The elite homes in town often combine badgers with their yakchuls, directing cool air over storage pits and even through underground dining chambers. You head back down into one such room now, led by a servant who's both barefoot and effortlessly balanced on steep, worn steps. She says nothing, just nods toward the arched doorway ahead. Inside, it's stunning. Soft rugs cover the floor, and a low marble platform in the center holds a wide, shallow bowl filled with water and floating blossoms. Tiny copper cups ring the edge, some already beading with condensation. You inhale. The air is dry but strangely fresh, almost alpine. There's a jug of something resting near the edge of the bowl. You pick it up, give it a swirl. Cold. Not lukewarm. Not cellar cool. Cold. Stored near the yakchul and kissed by breeze-channeling vents, this drink is exactly what the nobles here would sip while waiting out the noon heat or entertaining guests under lantern light. Mainstream historians tend to describe these systems as ventilation. As if they were just about moving air around. But when you're standing in a room that's 30 degrees cooler than the street outside, sipping chilled quince syrup in a desert, it becomes clear this was luxury. This was status. This was scientific elegance hidden inside architecture. You take another sip. There's an open scholarly debate about who actually invented the wind catcher. Egyptians? Persians? Some argue that badgers originated in Yazd and spread outward, others believe they developed simultaneously across the arid world, a kind of architectural parallel evolution. It's the kind of argument you could write scrolls about if you weren't so distracted by the way this cooled room is making your eyelids pleasantly heavy. Quirky tidbit: in some wealthier homes, servants would hang wet linens inside the windcatcher's shaft, increasing the cooling effect through evaporation. The result was basically an ancient swamp cooler, though far more elegant and less swampy. You recline now on a low platform covered in cushions. The sound of the wind is steady, like someone gently exhaling down a flute. From above, a faint trickle of water hums where a pipe drips into a stone basin. Everything about the design of this place encourages stillness. You're not meant to rush. You're meant to sit, sip, sigh. Eventually, a young apprentice joins you. He's carrying a wax tablet with schematics carved in it, lines, angles, flow patterns. He's being trained to build these things. You ask him if he knows how it works, or if he just follows the instructions. He shrugs. Then says something you won't forget. The wind knows. I just ask nicely. You laugh. He doesn't. You spend the next hour tracing the air's path through this house. From the badger's mouth above, through narrow ducts carved in the walls, into domed ceilings designed to collect and circulate the cooled air like lazy tornadoes. There's a science here. Maybe even an art. And as the sun climbs higher outside, you feel the satisfaction of being wrapped in cold that required no buttons, no switches, just time, knowledge, and mud brick. Eventually, you rise and thank the household steward. He bows slightly, then gestures toward the exit with a kind of reverence, as if leaving a cooled room on a hot day is an act of spiritual courage. You nod back solemnly. Back in the alley, the heat greets you like a slap wearing silk gloves. Still harsh. Still real. But now, you know where the wind goes. And more importantly, how to ask nicely. The sun has long since slipped past its highest point, and the city around you lies in a dreamy hush, except, that is, for the quiet murmuring of water beneath your feet. You're standing in the courtyard of a noble family's estate now, beside a low, moss-edged fountain fed not by rain or river, but by an underground miracle, the Kanat. To the untrained eye, the fountain just bubbles cheerfully, lazily, like it's been doing it forever. But you're no longer untrained. You've seen the ice ponds, touched the walls of the Yakchal, and climbed the wind catchers. And now it's time to follow the water. Someone hands you a torch, its wick wrapped in linen soaked in pine resin, and gestures toward a narrow set of steps carved directly into the earth. No fanfare. Just an arched doorway, a low ceiling, and the heavy, cool breath of darkness below. You descend into the Kanat tunnel slowly. The walls grow damper, the air sharper. The torch crackles, sending shadows lurching across the narrow walls. You're walking now through a feat of engineering that even modern hydrologists blink at, a gravity-fed tunnel system that ferries fresh mountain water across dozens, sometimes hundreds, of miles, all while staying underground, cool, and mostly invisible. The floor is slick, packed clay. Above, the stone curves inward, like the inside of a seashell. Every so often, a round shaft opens to the sky above, letting in a narrow column of dusty light. These are the vertical access wells that dot the Persian countryside like mysterious wells to nowhere. You've probably passed 20 of them already and not even realized what lay beneath. Historians still argue whether the earliest Kanats were purely Persian inventions or inherited from older Mesopotamian systems and expanded to terrifyingly efficient scales. What's undisputed is that by the time of the Achaemenid Empire, these aqueducts fed entire cities, oases, and, you guessed it, rice production systems. Because what good is a Yakchal if you can't keep it hydrated? You reach a chamber now where the water runs shin-deep across smooth stone, whispering over pebbles. A young boy sits on a rock beside the stream, carving something from a fig branch. He looks up, smiles, and offers you a handful of soaked cloth pouches. Inside each one, a frozen syrup pearl. How? He points up the tunnel, where the airflow has been carefully managed to create small, consistent cooling pockets using nothing but evaporation and earth. You pop one in your mouth. It's limey, sharp, and freezing enough to make your jaw flinch. He laughs. You laugh. It echoes up the shaft and vanishes into history. In wealthier homes, these Kanats didn't just feed fountains or cool kitchens. They were routed strategically under storage cellars, sleeping rooms, and even open-air tea houses. That's right, Persians were sipping chilled drinks in underground lounges centuries before the idea of on the rocks existed. Quirky aside, some Kanat tunnels had special stations built purely for napping. Narrow niches carved into the wall where workers or travelers could stretch out beside the cool water and doze, lulled by the hush of subterranean flow. You try one for yourself now, lying back on a clay shelf that was clearly never designed with tall tourists in mind, but it's surprisingly comfortable. The torch dims. You listen. Drip. Rush. Breeze. Silence. Repeat. There's a myth told in this region that the water inside the Kanat sings. Not just gurgles, but sings. That if you spend long enough listening, especially near a spring chamber at night, you'll hear it hum a lullaby in Old Persian. No one's sure what the words are, but they always say the same thing: stay a while. Breathe. Be still. You do just that. After a while, a bell rings faintly from above, the signal that it's time to return. You rise, stiff-legged, and begin the climb up a vertical shaft using carved footholds and a knotted rope. Dust falls behind you in lazy spirals, catching what little torchlight remains. You emerge into sunlight blinking, squinting, and immediately miss the underground calm. The fountain nearby gurgles, refreshed by the same stream you just napped beside. A young servant appears, pouring water over a clay bowl until the sides sweat. It's ready to be placed in the shaded kitchen, where it will keep rice and herbs cool for dinner. So much of this world runs quietly. No pulleys. No pumps. Just gravity, dirt, and endless observation. You step back and look out across the land. Somewhere underfoot, that same tunnel winds its way toward another courtyard, another fountain, another secret ice-storing corner. The Kanats knit the empire together like underground veins, circulating not just water, but coolness, calm, and quiet luxury. It's hard not to feel impressed. A little awed. And maybe a bit sleepy. It's early evening now, and the scent of saffron drifts lazily through the air like a silk scarf on a breeze. The sun hasn't quite set, but it's slowed down enough to bathe the buildings in that soft honey light that makes everything look like a painting, particularly the small market square where your next stop lies. Tonight, you're here for the sweet stuff. You ease onto a cushioned bench beside a low stool made of carved cedar. Behind the vendor, an elderly woman with the kind of sun-lined face that suggests she could recite for dynasties before breakfast, sit rows of copper urns and ceramic jars. They gleam in the light like sleeping suns. Inside them? The stuff of royal cravings, sharbat. Now, don't let the name fool you. This isn't a bedtime syrup or a medicinal goop. Sharbat is the ancestor of the modern sherbet and sorbet, but it's so much more. It's a chilled drink made from water, sugar, fruit or flower extracts, and in Persia's case, often cooled with ice that was harvested, stored, or begged from the local yakchal just that morning. You watch the woman ladle out a vivid pink mixture, rose and barberry, she says, and pour it over a lump of crushed ice in a delicate, fluted cup. The cup steams lightly in the heat. You take it and sip. It's cold. Not just cool, but cold. The kind of cold that finds the corners of your mouth and makes your shoulders drop in gratitude. Then comes the flavor, floral, tart, with a subtle whisper of mint at the back of your tongue. You close your eyes. You get it now. This wasn't just dessert. This was diplomacy in a cup. Royal courts across the empire served sharbat to guests, officials, and sometimes visiting enemies, though not always at the same time. Flavors changed by season and occasion, mulberry and lime in the spring, sour cherry and cucumber in the summer, quince in the fall. And in nearly all of them, there was ice. Or snow. Or slush. Whatever the yakchal could spare. Mainstream historical records often mention the opulence of Persian banquets, but it's the sharbat that shows up again and again in poetry and personal diaries, always described with reverence. Cooling. Soothing. Heavenly. You sip again, slower this time. The sun finally slips behind the rooftops, and lanterns begin to flicker on in the marketplace. The light now glows soft and golden, like the sherbet in your cup. The vendor begins preparing another round. This time, she grates dried lime peel into a copper basin and adds a thick syrup infused with cardamom and honey. The ice goes in last, hand-chipped from a wrapped cloth bundle she pulls from a clay box beneath her bench. You catch a glimpse of the straw lining inside. Someone's been keeping it cold with precision. There's a quirky little detail here. In some wealthier homes, sharbat was served with a small stick of sandalwood or cinnamon resting across the top. Guests were expected to stir their drink before each sip, as much to enjoy the scent as the flavor. You're handed one now, a tiny piece of carved wood that smells like warm forests and dry incense. You swirl the cup gently and inhale. Heaven. A scholar nearby explains that the word sorbet likely comes from the Arabic sharba, meaning a drink, which passed through Persian tongues and eventually made its way westward, morphing as it went. What began in the deserts of Iran now sits in Parisian freezers and New York street carts. Globalization via dessert. Historians still argue whether ancient Persians actually invented the iced version of sharbat, or whether it was just a local innovation built on a wider tradition of chilled drinks. Some claim even the Chinese had something similar. Others point to possible cross-pollination with Greek kitchens. But here, under this Persian sky, it's safe to say, this is where it flourished. Your host, a portly merchant with a glimmering beard and a belt pouch heavy with silver rings, tells you of a feast he once attended in Susa where each guest received their own flavored ice in a miniature bronze bowl. One bowl per course. He claims one of them was jasmine and grape, another mint and cucumber, and a final one, rarest of all, made from apple blossoms and mountain snow. You ask if he's exaggerating. He burps and shrugs. Probably. But what's storytelling without a little sugar? You lean back as a light wind stirs the lanterns. The crowd has grown, but no one's in a hurry. They sit, sip, and occasionally chuckle at something said softly, the way people do when they feel relaxed, unbothered, and just chilly enough to forget it's a desert. Children run past with clay cups clutched in sticky hands. One nearly trips over your foot and apologizes in a rush of startled Persian. You wave him on. He's giggling before he's even turned the corner. The elderly vendor hands you one last cup, this time without ice, just cool, fragrant syrup and water. She says it's a night blend, meant for calming dreams and quiet thoughts. Something about violets, licorice root, and the tiniest whisper of opium poppy. Just a breath. You raise an eyebrow. She winks. You sip. The flavor is indescribable. Gentle. Strange. Not like anything you've tasted. It's both sharp and soft, like memories and half-forgotten lullabies. You feel a little floaty. The vendor packs away her jars. The market begins to dim. Stars appear in the gaps between rooftops. Your cup is empty. Your fingers are cold. And your heart feels oddly full. By now, night has truly wrapped itself around the desert, cloaking the land in velvet darkness and pinpricks of starlight. You're walking slowly, steadily, toward the outskirts of the city, guided only by the occasional lantern and the sound of sandals on dust. But tonight, you're not heading to work. Tonight, you're invited to a banquet. And not just any banquet. This one is laid out under the stars, atop a flat-roofed terrace belonging to a wealthy courtier whose name you immediately forget, but whose taste in party planning you will remember for the rest of your life. You arrive as servants are placing the final touches, bowls of preserved quince, trays of almond pastries dusted in powdered sugar, and, of course, crushed ice resting in glazed ceramic basins. The air is perfumed with burning myrrh and lemon balm, and soft music drifts from a corner where two men sit cross-legged with a tar and a flute, coaxing slow, drowsy melodies into the air. You're handed a chilled cloth for your face and neck, scented with rosewater and lightly damp. You press it to your skin. It's like wiping away the desert. Then comes the drink, a sherbet again, this time made with tamarind and pomegranate, poured over fresh snow from a yachtchel nearby. The ice crunches like crushed pearls beneath your teeth. Somewhere in the distance, a camel groans. Banquets like this weren't everyday affairs. They were high art, a careful blend of performance, politics, and sensual delight. Everything is arranged to impress, not loudly, but thoroughly. The cold food is part of that magic. In a land where shade is valuable and water is sacred, serving ice is more than indulgence. It's power. It says, I can make winter in July. You settle onto a low cushion, the sky yawning open above you. The moon is a lazy coin, floating sideways. Silver trays arrive one after another, carried by silent servants who drift like ghosts. You're served pickled melon slices, small bites of grilled lamb resting on lemon leaves, and, surprisingly, an iced fig dish so sweet your teeth hurt a little. The host rises and welcomes the guests with a short poem. It mentions ice-like memory, plums that forget the sun, and the wind trapped in sugar. You're not entirely sure what any of it means, but everyone claps softly, so you do too. Then, almost ceremoniously, the first frozen course appears. It's not a dessert yet. It's cucumber soup, thick and cool, flecked with dill and yogurt, served in deep bowls with a shard of ice bobbing in the center like a lazy raft. You sip slowly. The chill slides across your tongue and down your throat, and you wonder why anyone ever eats soup hot again. Quirky tidbit: some Persian noble families trained special kitchen servants, called yarkai, whose only job was to manage ice reserves, when to fetch, how to portion, and which dishes deserved the purest blocks. They were like sommeliers, but for snow. Historians still argue whether these dishes were meant for regular court occasions or strictly the most opulent festivals, weddings, Nowruz, or midsummer ceremonies when the mere presence of cold food made jaws drop. But there's no question, this was theatre. Carefully chilled, tastefully timed theatre. A new course arrives. This one sweet, grape must frozen into irregular clumps and served over crushed pistachio. You dig in with a silver spoon that someone swears was chilled moments before serving, though your tongue isn't sure. Each bite is sweet, earthy, and grounding. It's like eating the memory of a vineyard. The man next to you, or a visiting poet from Babylon, judging by his robe and his ability to make metaphors out of apricots, leans over and whispers, "They say Darius the Great once demanded a bowl of snow sorbet before every battle, to remind him what peace felt like." You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Probably a lie, he adds, but a tasty one. Laughter ripples around the table. A moment later, a servant passes by carrying a tray of lemon ice cups resting in a wooden rack carved to fit them perfectly. Each cup is hand-painted, and you're told they were cooled in a miniature pit just outside the terrace wall. For better dreams, someone explains, and fewer regrets. You sip again. The music shifts now, slower, deeper, almost like a lullaby. A woman stands and begins a slow-turning dance, her sleeves flowing like water, her steps barely touching the ground. Everyone watches in silence. You forget your drink for a moment. When dessert finally arrives, it's the kind of dish that would make modern chefs weep into their sous vide machines. A frozen custard made with saffron, honey, and something floral, maybe orange blossom, presented as a dome with a single date balanced on top like a tiny sun. You hesitate to ruin it with a spoon, but then you do, and the texture is impossibly smooth. You taste sunshine. Then cold. Then memory. Later, long after the trays are cleared and the tea has been poured, the guests begin to lie back on their cushions. Some murmur softly. Others just sigh into the night. The stars are louder now. You stare up at them and feel something curious, not full, not even just content. Chilled. In the best way. Because in this world of dust and fire, someone took the time to trap the cold. To hold it for just a moment. And to share it with strangers. Your host reappears one last time, now holding a bowl of small snowballs. Not for eating, just for throwing. A game begins. Nobles in silk hurl tiny frozen scoops at each other with quiet glee, like mischievous children. Someone yelps. Someone laughs. A snowball splats beside you. You make one of your own. You aim carefully. You throw. You miss. But it's perfect anyway. You wake the next morning, not in your usual bed, but tucked into a shaded alcove near the court kitchens, with the last hint of sharbat still on your breath and the faint scent of grilled peaches clinging to your robes. A servant gently nudges your foot with a copper tray, not to wake you with food, but with the message, "They're ready." Today, you've been summoned to the heart of the empire. Not the metaphorical heart, either. Actual Persepolis. The ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire, home of towering columns, endless stone staircases, and carved reliefs so detailed they could practically whisper. If there was ever a place to find secrets hidden in cold stone chambers, it's here. You travel by covered mule cart, the road gently weaving through almond groves and occasional flocks of extremely judgmental goats. It's warm, of course. By now, you expect that. But you've also learned that, in Persia, where there's heat, there's probably a plan to cool it. And sure enough, as Persepolis rises ahead of you, carved into the face of a mountain like the gods themselves decided to get architectural. You can already spot the domed yakshal outside the eastern gate. It's smaller than the rural ones, sleeker, better maintained. This one doesn't just store ice. It guards it. You dismount and step into a courtyard paved in polished limestone. The sun reflects off it like a second sky, and for a moment you wish you'd brought one of those chilled cloths. A steward greets you and immediately hands over a cube of snow wrapped in fig leaf. No greeting, no pleasantries. Just, put this behind your neck. You obey. You exhale. You immediately feel 3 degrees more civilized. This is how the Persian elite live, not in defiance of the desert, but in graceful cooperation with it. And nowhere is this clearer than in the palace kitchens. You're led inside, past towering bas-reliefs of processions, lions, and long-bearded nobles with perfectly ironed robes. The kitchens lie off to the side, half open to the air but shaded by canopies made from interwoven reed soaked in brine to stay cool. Beneath them, the real magic happens. At the back of the kitchen, near a wind shaft and beside a canat-fed sink, stands a heavy stone vault. The steward beckons, lifts the latch, and opens the door with theatrical slowness. Inside is a cold room. Not cold like modern refrigeration, mind you, but noticeably, unquestionably cooler than the air outside. A small channel carved into the floor carries running water, and straw-lined alcoves hold neat stacks of partially melted snow packed in pottery jars. You step inside and immediately feel your shoulders relax. The difference is small, but real. And deliberate. Mainstream historians may gush about the palace's grand halls and throne rooms, but this little chamber, this unassuming nook of quiet cold, may be its most brilliant feature. Why? Because it's where the empire's most delicate, perishable luxuries live. Fruit syrups. Fresh herbs. Lotus root. Maybe even fish on special occasions, stored over ice and cooked within hours. One of the cooks opens a pot to show you something miraculous, a tiny mold of frozen grape must. It's been shaped into a flower. A dessert, sure, but also a message. We can freeze art. A palace scribe joins you, intrigued by your curiosity. He tells you, in a practiced, almost bored tone, that the royal kitchens use ice in more than just food. You can soothe fevers, he says, cool parchment before writing to avoid smudging, even help a burned finger from the oven. Then, lowering his voice, and sometimes, in summer, the King of Kings likes a handful of snow poured into his bath. You raise an eyebrow. He nods solemnly. His beard stays dry. His skin, chilled. The water turns to silk. You take a seat on a bench near the doorway, watching as cooks come and go, trimming herbs, slicing soft cheeses, collecting small scoops of ice wrapped in cloth. It's efficient, quiet, choreographed. One girl drops a ladle. Everyone freezes. The head cook stares. She picks it up, bows, and rushes off to clean it. The moment passes. Quirky tidbit, in some records from Persepolis, there are notations that suggest a ration of snow for cooling ointments and nervous hands. That's right, Persian spa treatments, 500 BCE edition. If you had coin, connections, and enough poetry in your soul, someone might rub your temples with ice and dab rose oil behind your ears. You leave the kitchen eventually, guided into a shaded garden, paradeda, the word from which we get paradise. It's all fountains, shade trees, and cool stone benches, designed not just for beauty but for breeze. You sit beneath a cypress, feet on a marble slab that's been watered to create an evaporative chill. The air moves around you in gentle loops, encouraged by narrow channels and the strategic placement of lemon trees. Historians still argue whether these gardens were meant more for ceremony or pleasure. Were they designed as offerings to the gods? As status symbols? As reflections of royal ideology? Probably all of the above. But right now, as a servant offers you yet another chilled bowl of mulberry sorbet, it's very clear what they're also meant for. Naps. You take a long breath, close your eyes, and hear the soft rustle of palm fronds overhead. Somewhere, someone pours water. A flute begins again in the distance. The empire runs on order, ambition, and conquest. But it also runs on ice. The afternoon stretches on with a luxurious laziness, and by now, you've moved from the palace garden into the bustling preparations for one of Persia's most treasured traditions, Nowruz. It's the new year. A celebration of spring, rebirth, and, because this is Persia, elaborately chilled refreshments. You find yourself in a courtyard just outside the walls of Persepolis, where long tables are being dressed in bright silks and surrounded by baskets of dried fruits, candied nuts, flower garlands, and, curiously, several ceramic bowls resting inside straw-lined crates. They're packed with ice, and from the reverent way everyone handles them, you realize these are more than cold snacks. These are ceremonial coolness. The woman in charge, older than 3 dynasties by the look of her and dressed in a robe the color of quince blossoms, waves you over. Come, she says, beckoning. Help with the halved scene. The halved scene is the New Year's display, 7 items, each beginning with the Persian letter S, each symbolic, garlic for health, apples for beauty, vinegar for wisdom, and so on. And nestled among them today? A bowl of sekanjabin, the mint vinegar syrup cooled with actual ice and served in crystal cups to keep everyone's tempers even in the midday heat. You help arrange it carefully, the cold bowl sweating lightly in the shade like a bashful guest. Next to it, someone places a tray of frozen lotus petals, the ice harvested weeks ago and shaped in molds made of bronze. You didn't even know such things were possible, and yet here they are, ancient Persian ice cubes, in the shape of flowers. Around you, the celebration comes alive. Children laugh and chase each other with flower wreaths. A man juggles citrus fruit beside a low table laden with apricot pastries. Someone strums a setar while another sings in a voice so smooth it could be mistaken for falling snow. Then it begins, the sharing of the New Year sherbet. Huge bronze pitchers are brought out, glinting in the sun. Inside them? Chilled mixtures of saffron, rosewater, and lime juice, each batch flavored slightly differently depending on the region of origin. You're handed a cup from the western batch, tamarind and basil, and you nearly drop it because, yes, it's freezing. The air around the yakchal earlier had felt impressive. This is next level. You sip and your tongue stings, then relaxes. You exhale, and it fogs, just faintly. Someone nearby, probably a scholar, judging by the length of his beard and his refusal to smile, leans over and recites. The snow of Shiraz tastes of honey and forgets the sun. It's nice. A little dramatic. But maybe not entirely wrong. Sharbat isn't just offered, it's honored. Small porcelain spoons are passed out, carved with lotus petals or tiny lions. Everyone dips, sips, sighs. Quirky tidbit, Persian ice wasn't always stored as plain blocks. Sometimes it was frozen into dishes directly, producing domes of chilled sweets that were peeled from their bowls just before serving. You watch now as 2 servants invert a copper mold onto a silver tray, tapping the sides gently until the frozen mixture inside, lime and cucumber, slips free with a soft slurp. It glistens like a gemstone. Gone within seconds. Later, as the sky softens into purples and golds, the official Nowruz performance begins. Musicians circle the garden. Dancers sway in time with the rhythmic beat of small drums, their sleeves fluttering like swan wings. Lanterns are lit one by one, and children begin running back and forth with small wooden trays of crushed snow, decorated with slivers of saffron jelly and candied orange peel. You try one. It melts instantly. And then you realize, it's not about lasting. It's about feeling it before it disappears. Historians still argue whether these ice traditions were rooted in spiritual symbolism or sheer indulgence. Was cold meant to represent purity or simply novelty? Some say the first Nowruz ice rituals were inspired by the mountain springs that fed early settlements, others believe it was about proving that even spring, the season of life, could be made sharper and cooler by human hands. You lean back, sherbet in hand, as someone starts reciting poetry again. This time, it's light and funny, something about a goat who ate too many plums and got stuck in a fig tree. Everyone laughs. As the night deepens, guests begin placing small bowls of snow at the corners of the garden, offerings, someone tells you, for a cool-headed year. Some of the children toss ice pellets at each other in mock battles. One girl, barefoot, grinning, dumps an entire ladle of slush onto her brother's head. He squeals. Everyone claps. You find yourself gazing at the sky. It's full of stars. The kind you can't really see unless the world around you goes quiet. And here, despite the laughter, the music, the tinkling of clay cups and copper spoons, there is a quietness. A stillness in the middle of celebration. Because Persia knows how to celebrate without rushing. How to offer a spoonful of frozen lemon and expect you to actually taste it. How to share winter on a warm spring night. You sit a little longer. Someone offers you a final drink, violet and honey, thick with ice crystals, meant to settle the stomach and cool the blood. You nod thanks, sip slowly. And think to yourself, this might be the first new year where you've actually felt new. It's not all sweet sharbat and rooftop dances. This morning, you're up early, not for ice, not for syrup, but for something far grittier. You've been assigned to a snow caravan. Yes, that's right. Today, you follow the trail of the people who, quite literally, bring winter down the mountain. There's no parade. No music. Just the slow, deliberate creak of wooden carts, the muffled clop of hooves on packed dust, and the soft rustle of thick, quilted cloth used to wrap the blocks of ice like they're sleeping babies. This isn't the dreamy world of chilled feasts anymore. This is work. This is logistics. And it's a brutal job. The caravan consists of 12 mules, 8 handlers, and 3 oxen pulling a covered sled-like contraption filled with straw and ice. The men walk with wide strides, sandals wrapped with extra cloth, faces shaded under large woven hats. The morning heat is already licking at the horizon, and your breath feels warm even in your own throat. The ice? That came from higher up, in the Zagros Mountains, where teams of laborers cut blocks of snow-packed meltwater, pressed into shape with weight and dried leaves, and stored it in high-altitude pits until it was needed. Now that it's spring, that snow becomes a commodity. A luxury. And you're watching it melt, inch by inch, even before the sun reaches full strength. You help with the hauling, straining against ropes as the path inclines slightly. The oxen groan. One of the mules decides to stop entirely and stares blankly at a cactus, seemingly lost in philosophical thought. Nobody talks much. After an hour, you pause under a spindly acacia tree. A boy, not older than 12, pokes at the canvas covering the cargo. His father, a man with arms like leather-wrapped fence posts, pulls it back briefly to check the load. Inside, the ice is sweating. Already, a few of the blocks have begun to shrink. He mutters something under his breath that you don't need to translate, too fast. This journey is all about timing. Move too slowly, and the cargo melts. Move too quickly, and you risk exhausting the animals or splintering the fragile blocks. One bump, one fall, and hours of work vanish in a puddle. You resume the march. Quirky tidbit, some ancient Persian texts mention spells or chants recited before long snow hauls, believed to bind the cold to its form. Whether that was superstition, ceremony, or just wishful thinking is unclear. But one of your handlers whistles a tune under his breath that repeats, over and over, the word for frost. The terrain shifts. The road narrows. You enter a small canyon where shade offers momentary relief. The ice handlers whisper thanks to the rock. You do too. Historians still argue how often this kind of long-distance snow hauling was done. Some suggest it was rare, reserved for major festivals or elite cities. Others argue it was a seasonal trade, regular and predictable, especially during late spring when demand soared and mountain snows were still available. The truth? Likely both. In a world without refrigeration, anyone who could move ice over long distances held a kind of soft power, silent, cold, and fleeting. You reach a village by early afternoon. The people there don't shout. They don't cheer. They just gather silently as the carts roll in, eyes trained on the cloth-wrapped bundles like they're holy relics. An elder steps forward, touches the edge of a straw wrap block, and nods slowly. The cargo is good. Still solid. Still cold. Children are allowed the first taste. Small flakes of the outer layers are scraped off and dropped into clay cups filled with syrupy juice. They slurp eagerly. Their faces bloom with surprise and delight. You find your own cheeks hurting from smiling. Inside the village's small yakchal, the ice is unpacked and placed carefully in the pit. More straw. More salt to slow the melt. The dome is sealed again, and a communal sigh ripples through the air. That night, the caravan men are fed well, honey flatbreads, roasted chickpeas, cold sour milk in wide bowls. Someone even brings out a scoop of last year's late winter snow preserved deep in the ice house. It's hard and cloudy but still carries a faint scent of the mountain. They shave it into a dish and drizzle date molasses over the top. You eat in silence. And for a moment, everything slows. The men begin telling stories. One swears he once saw a lion sleeping beside a snow pit, kept there by the cold. Another claims he watched a bolt of lightning strike a frozen block, and it didn't melt for 3 days. Lies, probably. Or just wishful memories twisted into myths. You don't care. They're good stories. Someone asks you what you've learned today. You think for a moment. Then you say, it's a long way to carry a season. Everyone nods. They've carried it for years. And tomorrow, they'll start again. You're not part of the caravan anymore. Tonight, you're part of something even quieter. You sit beneath a low canopy stretched between 2 date palms, wrapped in a woven blanket that still smells faintly of old straw and horse sweat. Around you, a few other travelers settle into place. A merchant with silver rings on every finger. A musician whose oud rests across his lap like a sleepy cat. A woman with ink-stained fingers, maybe a scribe, maybe just a lover of stories. No one talks much. The sand hums with residual heat, but the air now cools gently, as if exhaling. You're with the Yarkravan, or ice sleepers, the people who keep watch over the snow cargo on overnight rests. After a long day hauling melting treasure across deserts and valleys, they sleep not in tents or inns, but beside their ice. Because if it melts while they dream, they lose everything. The bundles sit in a low ring, carefully arranged, covered in layers of linen, straw, and the occasional charred leaf to keep bugs away. The ice is quiet now. But you can almost feel it working, cooling the night, just a little, within its small radius of stubborn winter. One of the handlers, tall, sunburnt, soft-voiced, explains how they choose their rest spots. Not too close to water, too humid, not too exposed to the moon, superstition, maybe. And never on rock, it radiates heat long after sundown. Sand is better. Always sand. You ask if they ever lose sleep. He nods. We all do. Ice dreams louder than most things. The others chuckle. You lie back, resting your head on a folded cloth. The stars above seem impossibly sharp tonight. Brighter somehow. Or maybe it's just the contrast, cold beside your cheek, heat still trapped in the dunes, and the breath of camels settling for sleep. There's no fire. The light and warmth would be a betrayal. Instead, a single clay lamp glows faintly near the edge of the group, its flame shielded by a bowl turned upside down and punctured with holes like constellations. The musician begins to play, but softly, just a few notes here and there. You recognize the melody. It's the same tune sung by that grandmother back at the ice pits. The desert's lullaby. Quirky fact, ice handlers often carried small bells, not to signal danger, but to gently chime near the bundles at night. It was believed the sound soothed the ice. Helped it hold together. Tonight, one of the bells swings gently in the breeze, barely audible, but they're all the same. You drift for a while. Somewhere in the distance, a jackal yips once. Then silence again. Later, the merchant begins telling a story, not loudly, just to the few nearby. He speaks of a time, long ago, when a prince tried to build his own yakchal from blue glass and golden stone. It gleamed in the sun like a jewel. But it couldn't hold the cold. The structure collapsed after the first summer, and the prince supposedly retired to the mountains, ashamed but wiser. The lesson, the merchant says, even ice doesn't care how rich you are. It only listens to shade, stillness, and silence. The scribe beside you mutters, that would make a fine epigram. The ice bundles don't stir. But if they could smile, they might. Historians still debate whether these caravan rest stops were official or improvised. Did traders really have regular snow stations across the empire? Or did each journey invent its own rhythm? Some Persian records mention iced relay routes, complete with way stations and assigned watchmen. Others suggest it was all handled informally, passed down by memory, gut instinct, and the occasional map carved on camel bone. Either way, tonight feels timeless. You wrap your blanket tighter as the temperature finally dips into something you might call cool. Not quite cold, but enough to remind you that yes, there is ice beneath those straw bundles. And yes, it's still holding on. Someone pulls out a bundle of dried figs and begins passing them around. You chew slowly. Sweet. A little sticky. A quiet pleasure to end a quiet day. The man with the oud hums again. The bell chimes once. And that's it. You fall asleep under the stars beside a melting miracle, surrounded by people who've built their lives around keeping a secret cold. And the ice? It stays. At least until morning. Morning comes slowly in the desert. You wake to the soft rustle of fabric, the crunch of sandals in sand, and the unmistakable groan of a mule who, despite living in a world of ancient engineering and royal ice, remains profoundly unimpressed by everything. The sun hasn't quite cleared the horizon yet, and everything around you glows faintly pink. You stretch, sand clinging to your elbows, and glance toward the ice bundles. They're still intact. Smaller, yes. Damp around the edges. But whole. Another successful night. But today, your path doesn't follow the ice. Today, you're following words. You're led to a low building on the edge of a sleepy village. It's simple, mud brick walls, wooden beams, but painted with delicate floral patterns along the door frame. Inside waits something you haven't seen much of yet on this journey, paper. Or rather, parchment, reeds, tablets, scrolls. A library, of sorts. And your guide today is a soft-spoken man with inky fingers and the serene face of someone who talks more to words than to people. This is where the language of cold lives, he tells you, running a finger along the edge of a shelf packed with scrolls. We don't just store ice. We name it. We describe it. We listen to it. You raise an eyebrow. He nods. He hands you a scroll, goat parchment, curled slightly, the edges darkened with age. You unfurl it carefully. Inside, poetry. The words spill out like water. The snow of Ardabil, light as breath. The kiss of wind on mulberry. Ice that sings in saffron. You pause. Ice that sings? He smiles. Metaphor. Maybe. Or not. You're handed another scroll, this one more technical, an account of winter preparations from a scribe's journal, describing how many bundles of straw were needed to line the storage pits, how much shade fell over the village by late spring, and which nights produced the best frost. Then another, a traveler's log noting how the ice in one village smelled faintly of almonds and in another, tasted of stone and ghostly herbs. That traveler might have been hallucinating. Or he might have had an excellent palate. Quirky tidbit, there are at least 7 distinct words for cold in Middle Persian. Not just synonyms, each describing a different type of cold. The icy sting of high mountain wind. The soft chill of a stone floor at dawn. The kind of cold you feel only in your teeth after sipping sharbat too quickly. You repeat one aloud. Sadi Sefid, white cold. Your guide nods approvingly. That's the word for ice from snow, not water. Colder. Purer. Like silence that forgot it was air. You flip through more records. One references an old saying, he who stores ice, stores time. Another mentions a woman, name lost, who supposedly wrote an entire collection of romantic verse about frost. She married a water merchant, the scribe adds, deadpan. Historians still argue whether these descriptions were purely poetic or whether they held practical purposes. Some believe merchants actually tasted ice before buying, sampling small slivers from different sources to gauge purity, flavor, or melt speed. Others think this was just symbolism run wild in a land where even the wind had names. You sit back, letting it all sink in. Here you are, in a building held together by earth and thought, surrounded by people who described cold not as absence, but as presence. A character. A voice. Something that could shimmer and sigh. You ask to see the oldest scroll. Your guide hesitates, then disappears into the back. He returns with a wrapped bundle, gently unwinds the cloth, and lays a thin wooden tablet before you. The writing is primitive, etched, not drawn, but legible. It appears to be a weather record, possibly from 700 BCE. The first line? Cold came early this year. The ice at night grew a skin. You run your fingers over the grooves. Not reading. Just touching. After a while, you step back outside. The sun is up now, full and brassy. The desert buzzes with the sound of waking insects and distant goats. But as you walk, you find yourself noticing the air in a new way. Is it warm, like morning dust? Or just cold gone, like the breath of a yakshal seal at dawn? The language sticks to you. Words you didn't even know existed. You pause beside a canap vent, cool air whispering up from below. You lean down and whisper back, Sadi Kha with Macron M. Unripe cold. A term the scrolls used for chill wind that promises snow but doesn't deliver. You smile. You're learning to speak in temperature. And maybe, just maybe, the ice is listening. You're standing in the courtyard of a minor noble's estate now, nothing like Persepolis, but still grand in its own dusty, sun-faded way. Stone columns carved with swooping vines frame a garden where pomegranates hang like little red lanterns. A servant fans a brazier with a bunch of peacock feathers, but it's not to make heat. It's to keep the bugs off the fruit bowls. Because today, something unusual is about to happen. Something cold. You're told to sit near the edge of the garden, where a long table has been laid with cushions, silver trays, and several large ceramic jars half buried in shaved ice. The air is quiet except for the occasional creak of palm fronds swaying above. You're not sure what you're waiting for, until a boy in a pale tunic rushes in, panting, with a shout. They are starting! And with that, the mood shifts. Guests begin to file in, young nobles, scribes, a few elderly scholars wrapped in layers even though it's pushing 100 degrees. They're smiling in a way that says this isn't just a gathering. It's an event. A court attendant steps forward and rings a small bell. Then, out of nowhere, a ball of snow arcs through the air and lands with a soft thump on the polished tile in front of the nobles. And everyone cheers. You blink. Did someone just throw a snowball? Yes. Yes, they did. Welcome to the snow court. Turns out, the Persian nobility had a playful side. And once or twice a year, usually in spring or during particularly sweltering stretches of early summer, members of the elite would gather in shaded courtyards and pelt each other with balls of preserved snow. Some were soft, fluffy, crafted lovingly from the top layers of yakshal ice. Others were compact and alarmingly accurate, hurled with the precision of a man who probably missed his calling as a siege engineer. You duck just in time as one whizzes past your head. The game is surprisingly organized. Servants act as referees, keeping the ammunition flowing and measuring splat zones. There are even informal teams, the Frost Sons versus the Peach Blossoms, which sounds more like a poetry club than a snowball brigade. You quickly realize there's strategy involved. Players hide behind date trees, faint with empty hands, and carry little woven baskets to reload mid-run. One young noble dramatically faints after a direct hit to the shoulder, prompting a round of exaggerated mourning before he's revived with a chilled fig juice. Quirky tidbit, records suggest that at least one satrap, possibly in Media, held an annual snow duel in his court garden, complete with scorekeeping, a trophy carved from glacier ice, and verses composed afterward to celebrate the day's coldest victory. You think about that now as a particularly smug noble struts past with snow dusting his eyebrows. Then someone shouts, "Open the barrels," and the tone shifts again. From the far end of the courtyard, several massive jars are opened, revealing soft, powdery snow packed weeks ago and hidden away for just this occasion. It's pure, white, and oddly pristine. Guests flock toward it like children, because, well, this is the grown-up version of being allowed to play with your food. But instead of eating it, they start sculpting it. One woman carves a little lotus blossom. Another shapes a lion's paw. One man, proudly uncreative, molds a crude snow pyramid and places a date on top. For artistic balance, he says, you're handed a palm-sized snowball and told, quite simply, decorate it. You look around, unsure what's expected. People are using petals, saffron threads, and even bits of dried lime to embellish their creations. You settle on layering yours with mint leaves and a curl of orange peel. A boy nearby gives yours a nod of approval. Looks tasty, he says, then eats his own. Somehow, it's both a game and a ritual. Part performance, part indulgence. You notice the scribes nearby aren't just watching, they're recording. They jot down scores. Note who threw best. Sketch who sculpted what. This isn't just leisure, it's social currency. Historians still debate whether snow games like these were widespread or limited to the more eccentric fringes of court culture. Some scholars claim they were rare, seen only in the most powerful courts that could afford to waste lice. Others believe they were more common than we think, hidden between the lines of banquets, shaded festivals, and family gardens. You start to think the truth lies in the joy. This doesn't feel like a one-time novelty. This feels practiced, repeated, refined. The musician switched to a livelier tune, and suddenly, a mock coronation begins. The winner of the snowball contest, determined by how many people he hit without being hit himself, is crowned with a wreath of frozen grape leaves and led around the garden on a palanquin pulled by laughing children. You almost fall off your cushion laughing. Even the elders chuckle, shaking their heads. By the time the sun begins its slow descent and the last ball of slush is thrown, the courtyard is covered in water, petals, bits of mint, and laughter. No one seems to mind. The ice is melting, the party is ending, but no one's in a hurry to wipe it clean. As you stand, stretching your sore back, a girl hands you a warm towel scented with basil and quince. For the chill, she says. You nod thanks. And as you leave the courtyard, soggy, amused, and slightly sunburned, you realize something. Even empires need to play sometimes. Even ice, so carefully stored, sometimes gets to be joy instead of utility. You walk away, shoes squishing a little, heart warm and spine cool. And somewhere behind you, someone's still singing. Let the sun blaze. We have snow. You've seen the parties. The poetry. The chilled sorbet sculpted into fish, flowers, and, once, what someone swore was a snow elephant with pomegranate eyes. You've thrown snowballs in a noble's garden and eaten grapes so cold they steamed in the sun. But tonight, your role shifts again. You're not in Persia anymore. Well, not exactly. You're in a border town near the empire's edge, where the dialects mix, the spices get hotter, and the neighbors, Babylonians, Greeks, Indians, peek into Persia's frosty toolbox with curious eyes. And sometimes, with envy. You're here as an observer, seated under a tattered awning beside two men deep in debate. One is a Persian scribe, familiar with all things cold. The other? A visiting scholar from Babylon, nose pink from the altitude, fanning himself with a palm frond. They're arguing, politely, about how, exactly, Persia keeps ice in the desert. It's the geometry, says the Persian. The dome. The pit. The wind catchers. It's sorcery, mutters the Babylonian. Don't insult me with bricks and shade. You sip from your clay cup, quietly appreciating the irony that this argument, like the sherbet, has been passed back and forth across borders for centuries. mainstream history doesn't always capture this side of innovation, the export of wonder. But wherever Persia sent traders, diplomats, or dreamy-eyed poets, stories of their frozen luxuries followed. And those stories had impact. In Babylonian markets, merchants began storing grapes in partially buried jars wrapped in wet cloth, an attempt to mimic the evaporative cooling of the yakchal. In the steamy cities of the Indus Valley, there were whispers of Persian ice rooms being requested by elite rulers. Some say these were built, others claim the requests were laughed out of town. Historians still argue over the evidence. What's clear is this: Persia made cold look good. Quirky tidbit: there's an old Egyptian tale about a pharaoh sending an envoy to Persia with a gift of rare myrrh, and returning not with gold or spices, but a small cup of frozen quince syrup. The pharaoh, according to the story, ordered it buried with him so he could sip coldness in the afterlife. Likely apocryphal. Still delightful. You wander now through the market square of this dusty frontier town, watching the mingling of styles and accents. Persian traders sell powdered snow mixed with fig syrup in sealed goods. A Greek traveler marvels at the miracle drink and offers 3 silver drachmas for a second one. Someone nearby is selling miniature domes made of fired clay, a child's toy version of the yakchal, complete with tiny straw-filled pits. You buy one. Couldn't help yourself. You follow a caravanserai steward as he shows off a modest attempt at a cooling room, nothing fancy, just a thick-walled chamber shaded by woven mats soaked in rosewater. Still, it works. The air is at least 10 degrees cooler than outside. He grins proudly. Inspired by Shiraz, he says. Or maybe Yazd. Depends on who you ask. That seems to be the mood here: borrowed brilliance. Adjusted, adapted, imperfect, but eager. You're invited later to a small gathering at a merchant's home. He's a cultural sponge, born in Susa, educated in Taxila, and now hosting guests from as far away as Tyre. Over flatbreads and chilled apricot paste, he waxes poetic about Persian yakchals. They're more than buildings, he says. They're proof that we can argue with the sun. And win. His guests nod politely, sipping cold lime water from cups kept in damp cloth sacks. The flavor is rough, slightly bitter, but icy. That, alone, is enough. You begin to see how Persian cooling culture didn't just spread through trade or conquest. It spread through envy. Through admiration. Through quiet, shared discomfort on hot nights. The merchant shows you a map etched on bark. Along the trade routes, he's drawn little snowflake symbols where, allegedly, ice could be acquired. Some are real, locations you recognize. Others? Dreams. Hopes. He shrugs. Sometimes just knowing someone has ice is enough to keep people moving. You stay late that night, listening to stories pass between cultures. One man claims a Greek engineer tried to build a yakchal near Athens using limestone and optimism. It collapsed during the first hot spell. Another swears that in the mountains of Bactria, monks store spring snow in hollow logs insulated with sheep's wool. Are they true? Possibly. Do they matter? Not really. Because the real story is this: Persia made cold into culture. And culture travels. Even now, you can hear a boy shouting joyfully in a nearby alley. He's chasing a runaway gourd filled with melting snow. Behind him, a girl laughs, holding a chipped clay spoon and a piece of ice clutched like treasure. You smile. Let the empire have its walls, its armies, its golden crowns. This bowl of freezing apricot paste, this shared wonder in a borrowed technique, this melting drop of inspiration, is power, too. And it's delicious. You wake to commotion. It starts subtly: raised voices, hurried footsteps, the unmistakable creak of a yakchal door opening far too early in the day. Then someone sprints by with a bundle of straw and panic in his eyes. You follow him instinctively, sandals kicking up dust, heart thudding with the kind of dread that only comes when something precious has gone wrong. When you arrive at the town's yakchal, the answer is written plainly in sweat and slush. The ice is melting. Too fast. Inside, the once solid pit of snow and layered blocks has slumped like a poorly made cake. Straw sags, walls glisten with condensation, and the air, usually crisp and dry, now feels like a wet sigh. A disaster. Someone yells for more straw. Another begins fanning the interior, as if air movement might coax the temperature back down. It won't. You already know that. This isn't a small melt. This is a full failure. The cause? No one's sure yet. Some say the dome's vent was left open too long during the heat spike last week. Others whisper that the sarouge mix had too much lime this season. It's cracked somewhere near the base, letting the desert in. But the loudest rumor is the most exciting: theft. Ice stolen in the night. You blink. Could someone really steal ice? Yes. Yes, they could. In times of scarcity, the actual raids weren't just the stuff of children's cautionary tales. Ice theft was a real problem, particularly when summer came early or shipments from the mountains dried up. A single block of clean snow could fetch the price of a goat. More if packed properly and sold discreetly to a noble in need of chilled syrup for his sulking daughter's name day feast. The town steward confirms it with a grim nod. Not all the ice melted. Some of it's gone. Clean cuts. Carved out in silence. You're sent with a group to investigate. Your feet crunch over damp clay, your nose full of that odd, metallic smell of melting frost. The courtyard nearby holds faint drag marks, someone pulling a sled through the sand, possibly wrapped in linen to reduce friction. Quirky tidbit: in some records from Yazd and Ray, the actual guards were paid not just in coin, but in ice rights, a share of each month's preserved snow to use or sell. But when times got tight, even the guards might get greedy. There's a famous case where a merchant faked a snow raid to cover for a gift he'd given a powerful satrap. He was caught when his goat slipped on the melting path and dragged the stolen ice right into the bazaar. Back in town, you catch murmurs of strange offers made in the night. A silk trader swears he saw a boy no older than 10 trying to barter a good of what he called sunproof snow. Another man says his neighbor's roof had a damp patch this morning, odd, since it hasn't rained in weeks. Historians still argue whether the collapse of ice stores during hot seasons was due to negligence or actual theft. Some claim it was a cover story, a way for careless stewards to deflect blame. Others believe in a kind of organized black market, a secret network of snow runners who moved ice across rooftops and alleys like cool smuggling shadows. You aren't sure which version you like more. But the tension in the air is real. The steward convenes a meeting near the town's main well. He's sweating. Everyone is. He announces rationing. No sherbet for festivals. No ice for household storage. The rest will be locked under seal until repairs are made and new shipments arrive. There's grumbling. One elderly woman snorts and walks away. A boy weeps. A merchant wrings his hands and mutters something about a contract that required cold apricots by dusk. Then a messenger arrives with worse news. The next mountain caravan is delayed. Heat stroke among the oxen. Snow melt on the high pass. There may be no ice at all for at least another week. The town falls into a kind of heat-shocked silence. You're sent to help insulate the smaller backup yakchal near the orchard. It's in better shape, thankfully, but there's less ice there, meant only for emergencies, medicine, and perhaps the local physician's tea. Inside, you see people laying fresh layers of straw and patching cracks with sticky mixtures of clay and goat hair. Everyone moves carefully, reverently, like they're tending to a sacred relic. Which, in a way, they are. Because in this town, during this week, cold is no longer comfort. It's currency. You help wrap a final bundle, tucking it into a corner where shade is deepest. It won't last long, but with luck, it'll keep until the next harvest. Maybe. You step back into the heat, blinking, shirt damp and mood heavy. Someone hands you a small fig wrapped in mint leaf, cool but not cold. You chew it slowly. It tastes like compromise. That night, a hush falls over the town. No Shabbat. No snowball games. The yachtl sits under the moonlight like a wounded animal, its vents sealed, its walls patched, its insides rapidly forgetting what winter felt like. Even the children stay quiet. And yet, there's resilience in the silence. Because tomorrow, someone will try again. Pour new water in the freezing pits. Check the badgers. Reseal the dome. And wait. The desert may win today. But the Persians? They always build for tomorrow. The next morning arrives with a hint of defiance in the air. The town is quieter than usual, but not defeated. You hear the rhythmic slap of wet clay being pressed into cracked yachtl walls, the low murmur of merchants whispering revised sherbet prices, and, somewhere behind it all, the steady whisper of curiosity. Because when the ice runs out, people start asking questions. Today, you've been sent to meet a scholar. Not a dreamy poet or a scribe of verses, but a true thinker. A woman named Parin, who keeps a small collection of tablets, scrolls, diagrams, and, most exciting of all, speculative models tucked into a sun-shaded study behind her family's bakery. You meet her surrounded by clay tablets and broken amphorae. She's barefoot, smudged with ash, and absolutely brilliant. I study freezing, she says simply, not looking up. How it happens, when it fails, what makes water change its mind. You raise an eyebrow. Parin gestures to a lump of darkened ice in a shallow clay bowl, melting fast. That was made 2 nights ago. From water taken after a storm. Froze faster than the others. Why? You open your mouth. She stops you with a raised spoon. I don't know. That's why I ask. You settle in across from her, careful not to knock over a tablet etched with swirling lines and what might be experimental poetry or just very confident guesswork. On the wall behind her hang fragments of early Persian science, some practical, others charmingly incorrect. One sketch shows a man sprinkling sand over water to teach it patience. Another shows a bowl of ice labeled solid wind. Quirky tidbit, the ancient Persian word for cold sometimes overlaps in texts with the word for quiet, suggesting that early thinkers believed the two were somehow linked. Parin taps one such tablet now, running her finger along the lines. Stillness cools. Movement warms. Maybe the yachtl isn't just for ice. Maybe it's for thinking. You let that settle. She goes on to explain her favorite theory, that water contains tiny cold spirits which wake up at night and gather together when the stars are clear. Not real spirits, she clarifies. Metaphors. But maybe also real. You ask if she's discovered anything useful. Parin shrugs. Only that the desert listens more when you stop shouting at it. You spend the day helping her test ideas. You mix different samples of water, some from wells, some from rain barrels, some from old canats, and pour them into shallow trays. She places them near shaded walls, under cloths, in pits, on rooftops. She makes meticulous notes in a surprisingly messy script. Later, she shows you a contraption made from goat bladder, clay tubing, and straw. Evaporative cooling experiment, she says, proud. You lean in, and sure enough, the water inside is a few degrees cooler than the air. Not enough to make ice, but enough to matter. Historians still argue how much the ancient Persians understood about thermodynamics. Clearly, they observed and used it. But were their theories just intuition? Superstition? Genius without math? Some records suggest early models of heat transfer existed, based on elemental balance, fire and air, water and earth. Others believe the work was mostly practical. If it works, do it again. If it doesn't, blame the wind. Parin's approach is somewhere in between. That evening, as you sip slightly chilled mint water and watch one of her freezing pans begin to crust over in the twilight, she says something that sticks with you. We talk about preserving cold like it's a substance. But maybe it's just a question. What's the smallest, quietest way to disagree with the sun? You smile. Then she adds, also, I think mountain water freezes faster than canal water. But I dropped my measuring spoon into the mud, so we'll confirm that tomorrow. You laugh. Before you leave, she hands you a scroll. My notes, she says. And some dreams. Don't trust all of it. But don't throw it away either. You tuck it carefully into your bag. Back in town, people are gathering again, not for a feast, but a meeting. Plans are being made, repair teams for the canats, new layers of plaster for the dome, watch rotations for the ice pits. No one says it aloud, but they're preparing to lose a little more. And keep going anyway. You walk past the yachtule just before bed. The door is sealed. The night air is soft. But above the dome, a few stars peek through. Maybe Perrin was right. Maybe cold is just quiet in a solid state. And maybe the people of Persia weren't just brilliant builders or master engineers. Maybe they were philosophers of temperature, turning frost into a form of thought. You pull your robe tighter, whisper a thank you to no one in particular, and head to sleep with the lingering image of a snowflake drawn in ink. Still. And full of questions. You're on the road again. Not hauling ice this time, just trailing a merchant caravan that smells like cardamom, camel sweat, and ambition. Ahead of you, the trade route fans out like a lazy river of dust and ruts, connecting Persia to the edges of the known world. Silk heads west. Spices drift east. And tucked among it all, hidden in tightly sealed clay jars wrapped in straw and cool cloth. A little taste of cold. You didn't expect to see it here, not this far from the yachtles and ice pits. But sure enough, nestled between bolts of dyed linen and spools of fine thread, a young assistant lifts a jar and reveals what looks suspiciously like a semi-frozen ball of mulberry mash. From Susa, he says, proud. Still chilly, see. You press your hand against the jar. He's right. Still cold. Your caravan leader, a gruff man with a thick beard and a voice like cracked granite, grins when he sees your surprise. Persian coolness travels, he says. Same way everything else does. Just faster if you know how to pack it. You learn quickly that preserving cold on the road is an art form all its own. Layers of straw. Clay jars lined with beeswax. Some traders even smear the exterior with mud that hardens like stone during the day, then slowly evaporates at night, cooling the contents within. No yachtule needed, just craftiness and a deep respect for shade. And this clever coal doesn't stop at the Persian border. At the next stop, a Greek trading post nestled between rocky hills, you find a crowd of locals gathered around a man with deep tan lines and a wrinkled map. He's handing out tiny bites of what he calls Persikos Glykos Cryos, Persian cold sweets. It's like sherbet, only thicker, almost chewy. It's been pressed into little leaf-shaped molds and wrapped in vine leaves. It's melting. But not fast enough to matter. The crowd eats it in stunned silence. One man immediately offers a handful of silver coins for the recipe. Another demands to know if this is a trick. The Greek host just shrugs. Persians, he says, taught winter how to travel. Mainstream history tends to focus on the obvious exports, laws, architecture, grand ideas. But this? This cold? This chill passed hand to hand across roads and ports and borders, it might be one of Persia's most charming legacies. There are reports from early Roman texts describing snow honey from the east. Others mention frigid figs packed in clay coffins arriving via caravan. And one very enthusiastic note from a merchant in Alexandria claims a Persian diplomat once gifted Queen Arsinoe a jar of frozen rosewater that sang when melted. Historians still argue what that last bit means. Some say the ice cracked musically when thawed. Others say it was poetry. You decide to believe both. You continue your journey west, and everywhere you stop, you see little echoes of the cold culture you left behind. In a town outside Babylon, a baker lowers ceramic bowls into a deep cellar lined with salt and old bricks. He's trying to make fruit jelly that sets firmer, even in the heat. Saw it done in Persepolis, he tells you. With ice. I've got shade and prayers instead. At a port near the Mediterranean, a family shows off their rooftop garden, complete with a clay amphora buried in sand, filled each night and sealed at dawn. The water inside stays cold for hours. Persian trick, the matriarch says proudly. From my grandmother's grandmother. Quirky tidbit, in one Greek town, you find a child's game called Frost Foot, a variation on tag where the cold one can freeze others with a touch. The children shout, Achaemenid freeze! And collapse dramatically when tagged. When asked, none of them knows why. But it's always been played that way. Somewhere along the Ionian coast, you pause at a stall selling drinks sweetened with honey and vinegar, poured over crushed seashells for texture. It's clever, refreshing, and not quite Persian. But the stall owner insists the recipe came from a man who used to pack ice in jars bigger than my boat. He might be lying. Doesn't matter. The idea's out there now, alive, adapted, evolving. Historians often refer to this as cultural diffusion. Cold knowledge melting into new contexts. Not always perfectly. Sometimes just inspiration, a whisper of how something could be. But it sticks. You see it in clay shards labeled with cold storage markings, in household ledgers referencing Ice for Festival, and in scattered poems across languages that all seem to say the same thing. Coolness is a kindness. You eventually make your way back east, circling toward Persia's edge again. The heat hits you harder now, after weeks of borrowed breezes and imitation frost. But when you pass through a small village just before sunset, you find a group of children playing beside a humble little dome of straw and clay. A miniature yakchal. Not functional. Just a replica. But it's decorated with careful paint, and beside it, a cracked bowl sits filled with half-frozen grape juice, still glistening. You crouch beside them. Who taught you this, you ask? One girl shrugs. My uncle was a trader. He said in Persia, even their shadows are cooler. She hands you a cup. It's lukewarm. But somehow, it still tastes like ice. You return home to Persia as the summer peaks. The roads shimmer with heat. The figs on the trees are bursting. Even the dogs lie belly up in the shade, too tired to bark. And yet, in the midst of all this melting, all this cracking dryness and sweat damp everything, there it is again. A yakchal. Silent. Still. And waiting. This one isn't grand. Not like the ice domes of Persepolis, or even the well-kept village house you first visited. No, this one sits alone at the edge of an old caravan stop. Its walls are sun-bleached and slightly lopsided. The dome is chipped. The vent at the top leans like it's considering retirement. But it's still standing. And that, honestly, feels miraculous. You push open the creaking door and step inside. It smells like straw, lime, and memory. The pit is mostly empty, only a small mound of slushy grey ice remains, preserved more out of stubbornness than necessity. But even in its half-forgotten state, the air feels cooler. Thicker. Like the kind of silence that holds its breath. You sit on the edge of the pit and just listen. No one has tended this place in years. The straw is brittle. A lizard skitters across the floor. But the structure holds. The sarouge is cracked in places but intact. The insulation still works. It hasn't stored royal snow in decades, maybe longer, but it's here. It could. Outside, the world is busy forgetting it. You step back out into the sunlight and take a slow walk through the town that once fed this yakchal. The buildings are crumbling. The main square is overgrown with weeds. But a few families remain, quietly, resolutely. An elderly woman sells herbs from a cart. A boy naps under a fig tree with a reed flute balanced on his chest. You ask if anyone remembers the old ice house. The woman laughs. Of course we do. We used to sneak in during summer. Pretend we were kings eating cloud sorbet. You nod. She continues, we stopped using it after the kanat dried up. Ice wasn't worth the walk anymore. A pause. Then, softer, but it never really left. You think about that. How something can disappear from function but linger in culture. How cold can become metaphor. Memory. Even myth. Quirky tidbit: in some rural Persian dialects, old yachtals are still called kneiyak, houses of cold. Not just storage. A dwelling. A place where cold lived. In a few tales, the yachtal is even personified as a sleeping guardian, a quiet beast that waits through heat and time for someone to remember how to wake it up. You find yourself circling back to Perrin's words, "We don't store cold. We ask it to stay." You sit under a tree beside the crumbling dome and sketch its outline in the dust with your finger. As you do, a child wanders over, curious. He asks what it is. You tell him it used to hold ice. His eyes go wide. "Here," he asks. "In the desert." You smile. "Right here." He kneels beside you and adds a door to your drawing. Then a sun with a frowny face above it. Then, thoughtfully, he draws a tiny clay bowl with steam rising off of it, ice in a cup. Or maybe sherbet. He doesn't label it. You both sit there for a while. No games. No poetry. Just the weight of heat and the shade of old engineering. Historians still debate why so many yachtals were abandoned. Some blame the fall of the Achaemenids. Others say it was simply urban migration, the rise of new systems, the slow loss of qanats in dry years. But there's no question most towns left them behind. Yet here they are. Quiet monuments to an era that refused to accept its climate as a limit. You eventually walk the rest of the town. You spot one more yachtal, mostly buried in earth and vine, used now as a shelter for goats. Another has been converted into a grain silo, though the dome remains untouched. Someone painted vines around its base, maybe as decoration, maybe in memory. That night, as you rest on the rooftop of a half-collapsed caravanserai, you can see the cracked dome from your bedroll. It glows faintly under the moonlight, like a seashell half buried in the sand. Hollow. Echoing. Still. And that's when you realize something simple. The yachtal doesn't need to function to matter. It meant cold, once. And sometimes, that's enough. A breeze stirs. A cricket chirps. Someone nearby pours water into a clay jug with a splash. And you, stretched beneath the stars, imagine what it was like back then. When the dome held snow, and the silence inside was colder than breath. You close your eyes. And sleep near the ghost of ice. You wake before sunrise. It's cooler now, desert cool, where the heat is still sleeping, and the air feels thin and forgiving. The sky is slate blue with a streak of orange at the horizon, and the old yachtal, still visible in silhouette, watches you like a silent host. Today is your last day. But before you go, there's one more thing you've been waiting to do. You walk slowly, back toward the abandoned dome, carrying a small clay pot under your arm. Inside? A bit of snow. Fresh, delicate, miraculous. Perrin helped you freeze it last night, using her best pit, her most optimistic theories, and a little luck from a cool, cloudless sky. The ice is soft now, already sweating in its jar. But it's enough. You step inside the yachtal again, past the cracked lintel and the worn stone threshold, and kneel beside the shallow pit. It's nearly dry. Just a memory now. You open the pot. With cupped hands, you lower the snow into the pit. It lands without sound. Not to store it. Not to save it. Just to give it back. You stay a while, seated at the edge like you've done a dozen times before. This time, you listen for the heartbeat of it all, the slow hum of air against stone, the silence wrapped in straw, the ghost of winters long gone. You imagine the pit filling once more, block by block. You imagine servants in wool cloaks hauling ice at dawn. You imagine a child sneaking in, tongue out, ready to taste a miracle. Historians might not record this moment. No scrolls will mention your gift. But somewhere, if silence has memory, it will remember the sound of snow returning home. Outside, the sun is creeping higher, the light warming everything in its path. The dome begins to glow faintly gold. You walk away, jar empty, heart light. The desert begins to stir. People rise. Doors open. The world returns. You pass by a small gathering in the village square, just a few neighbors, already busy pouring cool water into a basin lined with cloth. You hear someone say, "Maybe we'll try the ice pit again next winter." Someone else nods. You keep walking. At the edge of town, you pause to look back. The dome is barely visible now. But it's there. Still standing. Still waiting. Still cold, at least in spirit. You reach the road, and as you do, a young girl runs up behind you and offers a gift, a small clay spoon wrapped in mint leaves. You take it, smiling. She says nothing. Just grins and runs off. You hold it in your hand. The tool of sherbet. The symbol of sleep. The last trace of a journey that spanned sun and snow, stone and stars. And now, finally, it's time to rest. You've been walking a long road tonight. Through the heart of ancient Persia, into the cool silence of mud-brick domes, across mountains and deserts, alongside mules and musicians, ice thieves and snow dreamers. So now, as you lie back, blanket drawn up and head just heavy enough to tilt, let your breath slow. You've seen how cold was not just a temperature, but a story. A ritual. A rebellion against the rules of heat. You've felt the hush inside a yakchal, where even your footsteps seem to soften. You've watched snowballs fly across royal gardens, and laughed at fig-flavored slush melting in your hands. You've helped whisper winter into sun-drenched earth. And that work is done now. Let your body ease into the weight of sleep, like straw settling over ice. Let your thoughts grow slower, drifting like soft wind through Kanat tunnels. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the desert, still, quiet, enduring. If dreams come, may they be cool and drowsy. May you walk shaded corridors again, sip from a clay cup sweetened with memory, and hear the faintest chime of an ice bell far off in the sand. Because the Persians knew what we forget sometimes. That even in the hottest, harshest places, stillness can hold a secret. And cold, sweet, quiet, gentle cold can be a kind of magic. Good night, traveler. Sleep well.